thank you. It's great to be here and to see the wonderful turnout. Also to hear Eric's talk this morning and find out all the possibilities that are coming up. And as excited as I have been about this, that makes one even more excited to see actually the progress that's been happening. Let's see. Violating the laws of physics, I'll touch on why that came up as a title. Qualcomm, we founded that after I left Linkabit. We sold Linkabit in 1980, stayed on until 85, retired for 3 months, decided that's not very much fun, and started Qualcomm with 6 others that had been with me at Linkabit. And I can't say it's the best way to start a company in the sense that we didn't have a business plan, we didn't have a product in mind, we didn't have a spreadsheet. What we did have is the belief that wireless was going to continue to grow, and digital, of course, was the way to be going. And so with that basis, we decided we'd start and see what we could accomplish. And I told my wife that perhaps we'd get to 100 people. Luckily, it's gone better than that. Early on, came up with the idea of using CDMA, code division multiple access, and I won't get into the technical details, but using CDMA, originally we looked at it on a satellite basis and then thought about it for terrestrial. And so if just a few months after having started the company, I came up with that idea while we're on a consulting job. And we did take it to a little bit of experimental use, but then we didn't have the resource. We were still very small, didn't have the money to pursue it at that point. And we had another product that we thought we could complete. And so we focused on that product called OmniTrax and worked on that, brought it into production, had our first major sale in roughly October of '88. At that point, we decided we had some cash flow. We would go ahead and start looking back at CDMA in the context of what's called second generation cellular. First generation was analog, second generation digital, but focused on voice largely. Third generation, which I will be talking about, is based on voice, but of course, a very good data capability. And so we started to look at that. We convinced ourselves that indeed it was promising, gave a few lectures, people nodded yes, but there was a big division in the industry because there was a group that favored frequency division, another group that favored time division, multiple access. Code division had been looked at by many companies and then dropped. And so people were very skeptical of what we were saying, quite rightly. And so we decided in the usual fashion of small companies that we better go ahead and day and night for a while to see a demonstration of the system. And that was in October, November of '89, roughly. And after a few mishaps where I had to keep talking while we got a few bugs out, it all worked out very well. And so we did begin to get some industry support for that. But if you look at the picture, you'll see that we didn't quite have consumer-sized equipment. And so there was still some more work to be done. And to do that work, we had to, of course, make some chips to perform the CDMA operations, other operations within the handset, within the cell sites. And the question was, how are we going to pay for all of that? We did get some support from operators, but we decided that we would try at the time, somewhat unique business plan, namely one where we license a lot of potential manufacturers of the technology and would get an upfront payment, a license fee from them. If everything worked out well, then they agreed they'd pay us a royalty on the handsets, but nobody really believed that was ever going to be an issue, so I didn't pay too much attention to it, luckily. And that gave us a cash flow to go ahead and develop chips for the units to move beyond this first equipment. We did have another demonstration 2 years later when we had those chips, showed that the equipment did work, had a face-off with TDMA. A number of the operators thought they liked CDMA better, so we began to build some support and have many different manufacturers. To standardize it, that took about 1.5 years of effort. And finally, the first system went commercial in Hong Kong in roughly October, November of '95. So it's about 7 years since we went back to it, went through a standards process, developed equipment, and ended up with the first commercial system. A few months later, a second commercial system and then a third went commercial both in South Korea, and then we began to focus on the U.S. Well, we had been focusing on the U.S., but things move a little more slowly. And you would think by the time we had at least 3 systems up, a lot of the questions and issues, this question, do we violate the laws of physics, that would have passed. But in fact, it didn't quite happen that way. So there was a Wall Street Journal front page story on September of '96, not quite a year after the Hong Kong system went commercial, and rather doubting whether this is going to really be able to work ahead, that may have caused people to waste billions of dollars waiting on this, investing it, and it was going to be a flop. And then there was one professor at, actually 2 professors at Stanford, one saying we violate the laws of physics, the other saying that we had technical problems, probably can't solve them. And so even now when I give talks, even at the business school up at Stanford or the electrical engineering, I point out that CDMA indeed is now working worldwide very well, except within 15-mile radius of Stanford. Okay, well then, the industry decided to move on to 3rd generation, look for technology that would support both high data rate data as well as voice, and every company around the world decided, therefore, they had to go ahead to CDMA for 3rd generation. So there are 3 different flavors of the CDMA in 3rd generation being used, but all 3rd generation basically is based on CDMA technology. That first handset that we used to demonstrate that CDMA did work, but in a commercial sized package, required 3 different chips just to do the CDMA. But of course, as Eric noted this morning, there's been great progress in from Moore's law as far as every roughly 2 years being able to double the number of transistors on a chip. And so now, if you look at the chips, on a single chip, one has not just 2nd and 3rd generation, sometimes 1st generation capability on chip, but also a whole set of other functions. GPS for position location, camera support, movie support, camcorder support, but in particular, very powerful computing capability. And that computing capability continues to go up, and that, of course, is what's going to be well used, I think, in all of these health, wireless health type initiatives. And so we've already made great progress. We have a product that's based on Snapdragon that goes into a number of the different smartphones and devices, currently running at 1 gigahertz. Capability of 2100, if anybody remembers the old VAX computer, but 2100 of these mini computers based on part of a chip these days. And so a lot of progress. Looking ahead to dual processor capabilities, and actually looking beyond that to a lot more capability that we'll be announcing over time, and we and others will be announcing additional capabilities. And so that device you carry around with you that runs on batteries, it's going to have enough capability to do lots of the filtering or lots of the processing of data, extraction of signals from noise, et cetera, that we're going to need with a lot of our medical technology. After that little yellowish box, not only are the chips having more capability, but now you stack a few chips, put them in a single package, and that's how the phones are getting very small and getting, again, less costly, easier to manufacture, et cetera. Well, I think this has also been mentioned that there are over 5 billion subscribers worldwide. A few of them may be double counted, but roughly that order of magnitude. Now the predictions are that we're going to move towards 6 billion fairly quickly. We're running out of people around the globe to have the phones, But of course, a number of people are having more than one phone, and we're going to be seeing more and more of the machine-to-machine and the health type and other types of applications that will be using more and more of these processors. 3G already over 1 billion subscribers, and that also looks like it'll be approaching about half the subscribers by 2014. So things keep moving along fairly quickly. Well, a few interesting quick facts here that the Cellular Telephone and Internet Association came out with just a short time ago, that although people claimed for a while that because the U.S. waited a little bit longer to have CDMA, that we basically destroyed our wireless industry and we were helplessly behind. Well, right now, as you know, penetration 91%, revenue per minute much lower than, for example, in Europe, a quarter of what's in Europe, and therefore much heavier usage. 92% covered by third generation, and more 3G subscribers here than basically the main countries in Europe. So we didn't fall behind. Having competition, I think, generally works out very well. You may wait a little bit if it's coming on the market a little later, but at least people can make that decision which way to go and have great advantage. So we benefit very much from the fact the FCC, for example, has allowed the market basically to make these decisions. Well, the CTIA also asked some questions about healthcare, wireless healthcare applications, and you can see some of the numbers. Their estimate currently 300 million. A lot of interest in wireless healthcare solutions and health. That was back in 2009. Expected to grow. And interestingly, that 19% said they would upgrade the existing plan to participate in mHealth. We'll see how that changes as we do a bit better. And that if a wireless operator doesn't offer it, that would be a kind of a negative aspect. And so even back a little bit before a number of the things that are being talked about here and that will soon be coming to market have become fact, there's still a great deal of anticipation and expectation that things will be going well. Well, third generation will continue to grow fairly rapidly worldwide for the next several years. There's also now fourth generation being discussed. Intent to take advantage of wider bandwidths and get higher burst rates, about the same average same throughputs in a given megahertz, and so it doesn't give particularly more cost efficiency. That's going to come from new network configurations. But things continue to move ahead very rapidly. You can see, if you can read that there are basically three forms of CDMA: high-speed packet access, HSPAA, PA, EVDO, evolution data optimized, and TD, time division multiplex, synchronous code division multiple access. And then fourth generation, LTE, long-term evolution. And finally, the only one with a marketable name, WiMAX, but probably the one that will have the most trouble moving ahead despite that. So we may be fairly good engineers among these groups, but we're not very good marketing folks. In any case, though the growth is there, the only company using TDS CDMA that was developed in China, they delayed their whole 3G launches to wait for it, and then they had China Mobile, which is the largest mobile company in the world, operator in the world, make use of that. But I suspect that will move on at some point when the government permits it to TD-LTE. So we'll see that all happening. In any case, the capabilities, the wireless access capability, the ability to access the internet, and probably more and more to even have peer-to-peer type communications, all that's going to continue to improve along with the additional capabilities in the devices. I think you're all aware of the different, and of course each month or so you get several new devices hitting the operators' sales rooms, and several different operating systems. I suspect this is going to begin to shake out a little bit as far as the operating systems as we go forward. But clearly this whole aspect of app stores, the ability to make use of smartphones, I think has really opened up since Apple came out with their iPhone and showed that there really is a user interface that allowed people to do more than one thing on a phone. And so for a while that had been in debate, but clearly now that's no longer an issue. And in fact, there's a whole class of devices now going, as you're quite aware, started with the iPad as far as being very popular, devices with somewhat larger screens, touch screens, and additional capabilities. These are largely based on chips developed for the phones, so therefore they have to run with very low power usage and be relatively inexpensive. And so I think we're going to be seeing more and more capabilities provided here, but where you can leave the device on for a full day, you don't have to worry about it. It's instant on whenever you want to go make use of it. Always has connectivity, and of course with GPS on these types of chips, it's position sensitive as well. Typically very good cameras, video capabilities, ability to play TV, all types of capabilities on both the phone size and this slightly larger tablet size. So all these things are happening. And in fact, probably the most energy draining aspect of the devices these days has to do with the display. And so they tend to use power. That's why you turn them off when you're not making use of it. But there's several people, and certainly Qualcomm, working on devices that will have be reflective, so that unless you're in the dark and have to turn a backlight on or a front light on, that they are fully visible, using very little energy except when they're changing, and less energy than other displays. And so I think we're moving toward video-capable, color, visibility, and bright daylight type of displays. And if you think about it, people for a while worked with digital watches, and I think they fell out of favor because you always had to press a button to see what time it was. You couldn't leave them on because the display drained it. Well, with these type of displays that, again, work on reflectivity, you won't have that problem. And so one of the areas I think that you'll be seeing more and more such applications, in fact, is going to be a watch type device, because you look at it and it's on. You don't have to worry about that kind of capability, that kind of problem. Well, I think there's obviously been lots of discussion about what's been happening in the use of wireless, various types of smart bandages, biosensors. I think we're still very much in the very early stages of this, of getting devices, getting them out to the public, getting the processing in the phones that allow us to really make best use of it. But it certainly has started and is making, I think, some significant progress, and obviously a large amount of interest here. So this is an area I think that's going to be one of the more rapidly growing application sides. And there is at least one public company, there may be more, CardioNet, and whose stock price I noticed was up a little bit today. And they've had some very good results comparing the use of the wireless approach versus previous approaches that I think Eric also touched on. That it not only is easy to make use of, but it actually provides better outcomes. And I think, again, we're just really getting into the beginnings of these aspects. And so hopefully there'll be more and more companies that are successful being able to go public with various devices and being able to see some of these types of improvements. Now, Qualcomm has had an interest in this medical area actually for a number of years, and I was surprised, I was surprised when I saw this chart that, in fact, we're involved with so many different areas, and I suspect, again, that this is only going to increase because of all the activities. And it is certainly an area that's of great interest to us, both from worrying about communication aspects. How do you get personal communications, very, very low energy usage, very local, very private. We have some approaches that we have been developing there, and then a whole range of other aspects, including venture capital type investments to try to make some of these things happen more rapidly, various strategic investments of various kinds. as well as, again, being involved with different organizations. And so I think this chart will only continue to increase as we look ahead. Well, what other things are happening out there, some of which may be quite applicable to the medical fields, and one of those is something that's called augmented reality. I think for several years we've been familiar with the ability to paint in a line on the football field that shows you how far you have to get for the first down. That, of course, is virtual. It's not really there. And there are a lot of other possibilities. One, and I'll call your attention to trying to read that sign. Probably only a few of you are able to read what the destination possibilities are. But again, with virtual reality, if you'd be able to look at it through your camera, hold it up, and your phone, have that processed and get that type of information. So that's one of the kinds of things that one can think about. You can obviously, therefore, think about a whole range of other applications. More and more interaction between phones and other devices, both in your home, but also hospitals, clinics, other areas. This one is just showing the ability to transfer a picture that's on your phone over to your TV. I think, by the way, a lot of the digital rights management, a lot of that's going to end up being handled through devices you carry with you, mobile phones, and then when you go visiting, be able to, in a similar fashion, apply those. Another one, looking down in this case, a street full of restaurants, getting an idea of which ones are there, perhaps being able to then select one, decide where you might want to eat, be able to make the arrangements for that. See where your friends might be and who's there and what might be happening, get some notes from them. So these kind of things, picking up the phone, let the phone recognize the scene, get the context, give you back information that you might be interested in. And again, there's really now a major effort in this direction. I think we're going to have a lot of applicability. And there's one that I'm, for one, going to find exceedingly valuable. Namely, you look at someone, you say, I know that person, but name, where did I see that person last, etc. And so having the phone take that job over for you, give you a name, a little bit of information about them, be able to, in fact, grab up some further information if you wish. I think for some of us, as we approach certain ages, that's going to turn out a very, very helpful aspect of virtual reality. And of course, face recognition, many of you are quite aware, certainly from a limited vocabulary of faces, is getting actually quite good. And so this is something that's not too far off. Another aspect that we've been quite interested in, again, 5 billion phones out there. We're certainly interested in the health areas, touch on a few of those. There's a whole range of different aspects that having these devices out can, in fact, allow one to provide some improvements in people's lives in a variety of different ways. And so we have what we call a wireless reach program. We keep expanding that. We're currently in about 28 countries. And in each country, we usually look for some partners in that country, a way that if it's successful, it can scale up to become commercially supported, et cetera. Indonesia, we were working on approaches for microfinance, providing women with an ability to start a business, in this case by a kit that has the phone, has a larger antenna in case they're further away from a cell site, marketing materials, extra battery capabilities, perhaps solar charging. And that program was moving along quite well. That's the good news. The bad news is, well, perhaps the good news side, the number of cell phones in Indonesia and just about everywhere you look has been expanding so much that these businesses are now becoming less viable. That's the bad news side. The good news side is that the women, in many cases, that have started out this way, and usually they're women, have indeed gotten a taste of being entrepreneurs and are now going out and marketing a whole range of other devices. And so it's gone from just supporting the phone approach to supporting other approaches. So that's been an interesting one. Fishing, also agriculture, possible using the phone, using local dialects, if it's done by voice, to bring information about where the fish might be biting, what the weather conditions, where there's any emergency, what price you can get if you land at different ports. A program that we started again is a project that's now gone commercial in India, and it's been having some interesting success. And it does allow people to eliminate the third parties that had been taking a significant cut from the profits and be able to get more money on their individual projects. So that's an area that will continue to grow. And interestingly, since they do get it by voice typically, and maybe a few pictures on the phone, diagrams, that I'm hoping that it causes people to want to learn to be able to read and write to get that much more use from the data. So we'll see whether it has an impact on literacy or not. Brazil, a similar kind of thing, except this was with indigenous people. They were overfishing the waters. There were then livelihoods being threatened, having to leave their areas. And so we set up with the Brazilian government and local province ability to provide more information both on the fishing side, what, when, how much they can get, and also help them in other business areas. And again, even in these kind of regions, huge availability of cell phones, a growing availability of cell phones, just every continent, wherever you look these days. So that's been a good approach. Something getting back a little closer to the telemedicine type of things, and I think probably some have talked about the pill phones or whatever, but the ability to remind people, keep track of the pills, remind them to take them, keep track whether they actually did, and be able to get a more effective use of various medications. Another, which was one of the obvious ones when we got started, was to go and equip various clinics, provide a data link back to a hospital area, or at least to some place where there's more trained people, and be able to use a relatively untrained person, or when doctors come in and give them those capabilities, make measurements locally, send them back, get diagnosis, get advice, and send that back and forth. And so we've been supporting a number of these different projects in different parts of the world, and that's been working out rather nicely. Extending that, there are obviously cell phones for elderly people locked in their homes, but what other things can you do with them? And so again, projects set up in Spain with Vodafone there, looking for various ways, trying to learn what schemes, what will work to assist the elderly in living a rather better life. A similar situation in Portugal, people with disabilities, what might we be able to do there? What can we learn from these various projects that might then be expanded, hopefully go viral? Education, I think the whole field of education is in fact going to be completely transformed over this next decade. We've talked for years about technology into the schools, bringing a computer, having computers available in class, etc. I think the real gains are going to come by having it much more broadly distributed. In any case, this is a case where we did in China, and these are typically, these schools are children of migrant workers, where they really are in parts of the cities you don't usually see, and not in the world's best conditions, but bringing them the computers, giving them the communication links, working with other companies in China, in this case, to provide this improvement in education. But this is the approach that we had been following a few years back and trying to do what can we do better. Well, several years ago, back in 2000, I guess it was, I was traveling with President Clinton talking about how do you provide solutions to the digital divide. And we went to a small town in North Carolina and went to a small business there, actually an environmental equipment manufacturer, who did have access by phone line to the internet. And we brought in, at that time, EVDO, high data rate capabilities was still pre-commercial. But we brought one in, set it up, and went through some of the various different things, contacting customers, contacting the suppliers, diagnosing problems in the equipment, showing how much better it worked when you had a high data rate connection to the internet available. As you can see, President Clinton got rather interested and in fact stayed with the equipment, playing with it for an extra half an hour or so, and set back our round table and other meetings a bit. But that was interesting. Governor Hunt at the time came and said, okay, this is all very nice, but once this is commercial, are you going to come back and actually do something useful here in North Carolina? And so several years later, thinking about that, we decided to go back and set up what we call Project Connect. And here in several high schools around the state, typically low-income high schools, we provided a class, initially a class in algebra, and then expanded that with smartphones. And the idea here was that those smartphones would stay with them and that they could take them home, use them at home as well as in the classroom. How to educate the teachers, how to get over this, of course, this tremendous bias that says the worst thing you can do is allow a student to have a cell phone in class. Well, the kids love these things. The question is now, how do you make best use of it? And so this was perhaps to provide that kind of demonstration capability. And so we did some work with the teachers, with the students, and one of the results that one of the early years was in a class that was being taught by the same teacher. The kids with the smartphones, 100% of them passed their state test, but only 2/3, roughly, 60%, 67%, 2/3 passed that didn't have the smartphone. Same teacher, same high school. And so that there indeed was some significant improvements here. And so we began to look into that. What aspect, where is that really coming from? And part of it was the classroom, part of it was the excitement of the students, as with any experimental education experiment. But it turned out that a major use was the fact they had it 24/7. They had it available at home. For example, they start to do a homework problem, get stuck, ask a parent couldn't help them. They could then go and check with students around the state and get some help and therefore be able to proceed ahead rather than simply waiting it out. And then it moved ahead where some of the students came up with very good ideas and videoed themselves and passed that around. And the last time I was just there talking with one of the teachers, he said that during class now, the first 2/3 of the class period, he let students present various solutions that they've been able to put together. And he works with individual students. And then the last third, he'll go ahead and give some additional material. So that's been working rather well. Well, the most recent development, I think this is less than a month ago, the FCC recognized these possibilities. In the past, they've had E-rate programs to help poor communities, but they wouldn't allow that to support, for example, mobile communications outside the classroom for educational purposes. Well, they've just set up a program they call EDU, provided to that $10 million for a short program to evaluate these approaches, ask for various schools to participate, and they will now be supporting off-premise wireless. And one of the bases for doing this was the results that we showed here. So again, beginning to have that kind of impact. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I believe that over this decade, not only is medical health going to be transformed, education, which is, I think, a contributor to good medical health, is also going to be transformed. Clearly, textbooks going to e-books so that you can carry around various materials. Self-testing in the sense that as a student goes through the material, gets stuck, looks at some other aspects. In some sense, that's really testing, understanding just how the progress is moving ahead and how well they're doing. So I think we're going to see some very major changes looking ahead. I'm glad that we're off to this start. I would hope, by the way, that at some point they set aside, and I don't think it's been done yet, some monies for supporting wireless capabilities for the telemedicine type areas, mHealth type areas, so that in poor communities, that's not going to preclude people from making use of these types of capabilities. Okay, just a couple words here on Qualcomm, although there were some words earlier. I think perhaps, again, the one I'm most pleased about is our continual presence on Fortune's list of 100 best companies to work, and that decision is made by employees. We're always looking for better ways to support people at Qualcomm, others. And I think this whole area of mobile health is one that we've been talking about. How can we make better and better use of that to support employees at Qualcomm, and then use that as a learning experience to take it out elsewhere. So, thank you very much, and I hope this conference continues to go along very well. Oh, sure, if there's time.
So we have some time for
questions. Hi. In the long term, in your opinion, do you think the mobile industry is going to be a parallel, independent of the cellular phone industry, or do you see it as being more dependent or converging at some point?
Did you get that? Could you say that a little more?
Yeah, my question is, in the long term, do you think the wireless health industry being, independent, parallel industry compared to the cellular phone, or do you think they're going to converge or be dependent, or
Yeah, I think it's going to go through the same kind of cycles that a lot of other startup industries have gone through. That is, there's going to be a lot of innovation, a lot of small companies doing that innovation, that some will succeed, some will fail. Most will end up being snapped up by larger companies, and so there'll be kind of birth and consolidation going on. But hopefully some will, in fact, themselves grow into very significant sized companies. I think that if you look at the number of dollars, the percentage of the GNP that goes into health, and the fact we think that one can make a fairly major improvement on that, there's certainly a very large pie out there. And therefore, I think there's a large enough pie that there's going to be many companies able to take advantage of it.
that we have as an industry is the economic food chain, is the reimbursement policies that we have to battle all the time. How would you, if you were in a position, doctor, to go after trying to convince health industry, mostly the insurance companies within the United States, where the economic differentiation for the fact that we don't need to go to see a doctor to be able to be diagnosed and managed, and have the doctors be reimbursed?
Yes, that's, of course, always been a major problem, even the use of email and texting back and forth, doctor to patient, doesn't get compensated generally. A lot of preventive health things do not get compensated. The question is, how do we make those changes and improve it? I suspect if you get an organization, let me not specify one, but something where they get a fixed amount, like Kaiser, and therefore whatever they can do to reduce the total cost, that benefits them. I think those kind of organizations may start first. But one needs to do is to be able to get more and more examples where money is being saved, that these approaches are paying off, and then be able to go back, convince both the insurance companies, which is always somewhat difficult, perhaps work through a smaller number of very large companies who are looking for ways to control their medical bills and are much more open to innovative ideas. And of course, finally, government, state, and federal government. So it's not a fast process, but again, I suspect a lot of this will be happening over the next decade.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one, if you can tell us something more about this trials, if I understood correctly, in Spain and Portugal for the elderly people inclusion, and in particular with what was the role of the operators and what was the role of Qualcomm. And the second question is, in your view, what can be the role of a telecom operator in mobile health, and in particular related to the devices and the body sensor networks, if there is a role in your view in the middle long term? Thank you.
Right. In Portugal and Spain, I'm not sure how that got initiated. We are always looking for partners, talking with various operators, talking with other companies, trying to find something that might be of interest in that particular region, and where we could get support for getting that going. And so probably there was a significant period of discussion back and forth. Then how do you design a program? How do you put that in place? How do you have metrics for how well you're doing? And should it at some point go commercial? So I don't know the details of how those particular programs started, but probably within a year and then 2 years, we'll be getting metrics fed back as to how well they're doing, what success, where the problems, how might we proceed ahead, and then hopefully have operators decide to support this, other companies support this, and make it an ongoing commercial activity. And so that's the way we try to build these. Operators, I think, one of the questions, of course, when you have, for example, 24/7 access for wireless health, for education, whatever, there's a cost to that, and how do you subsidize that cost? Is that going to be done by the governments? Is that going to be done by the companies? What kind of payments could be made? Clearly, as we make the communications more and more efficient, bring down the costs, and all these changes in the semiconductors allow the base stations as well as the equipment themselves to come down in cost. Can we make improvements there and allow it to grow much more broadly? Again, over this next decade, I think we will see quite a number of improvements. The whole cellular network structure, architecture will be changing, where one ends up with more close-in type of base stations that allow you to both get higher data rates, but also reuse the spectrum more. Spectrum is always a limiting factor, and therefore reduce the cost, maybe pass some of that cost on to others. And so there are a lot of issues here with how operators who have to make a profit on their investments and on their investment in the spectrum, how they move ahead with it. But I think we're going to be learning as we go through these various projects how to do that better and better, and the technology is going to support this greatly.
So currently, the technological society and the medical society or communities are developing quite separately. How do you see that these two communities be gapped, be bridged, so that innovations and collaborations could be sped up?
Well, I'm always a project-based person. I look, rather than trying to solve the whole problem at once, look for some specific areas that one can work in, get some proof that these indeed are valuable for the various communities who otherwise might not be communicating or working together very well, and kind of build on that a step at a time. And so I think probably that's what may happen here. But again, the other aspect is every large company in the country, more so in the world, but certainly here in the U.S., has this cost of medical care continuing to go up. I think they're going to be very open to some of these ideas on how do we provide support for our employees, get better health at lower cost. And so they may be a way to both interest the technical side and the medical profession, as well as the people that handle the payments, be able to make them all come together. So again, projects, and then hopefully from these projects demonstrating its value, being able to cause people to say, hey, I have to become part of this.
I wonder if you could amplify some comments about this whole net neutrality issue, and that is, should gaming and watching YouTube videos get the same priority? Or are we going to have bandwidth on steroids? Or how are we going to deal with health type requirements in the future as this expands? Is there going to be a way to prioritize this or a need?
There clearly is this whole issue of net neutrality, and that means different things to different people. You do have the problem with wireless that there's a fixed amount of spectrum. It tends to be more and more expensive every time there's an auction. Then you have to build out lots and lots of infrastructure to cover various areas and continue development. So there are some significant costs involved with all of this. If you look at something like video, very high bit stream data rates compared to, for example, voice. And so how do you get the balance of allowing a large amount of video versus voice? Voice, although the revenue's been going down, they probably per bit are giving you a lot more, giving operators a lot more of their profit. And so it's going to be something that, again, has to be watched. I think with the net neutrality, one of the ideas there is that you don't favor, say, something from one company over something from another company, so that you have favorites that may pay you a little extra and you give them that benefit. But the possibility of charging differently for different amounts of data, or the way I prefer to see it, you get a quality of service, which perhaps if you pay a lower amount may give you a certain amount of high data rate usage, a certain number of gigabytes in a month, or megabytes, or whatever you're paying for, that if you get beyond your limits, you still can make use of it, but you have a lower priority. If somebody else wants to get on first, they would get on earlier, and then when the network is less busy, you would be able to get usage. So different ways of playing this game. But then the question, how do you handle it for the medical applications? And again, I think there's a variety of these medical applications. Many of them are very low data rate. And so almost like texting, but which people charge still quite a bit for, but still fairly low expense. And so I think we can handle a lot of that data without a significant cost factor, a significant problem for the networks. Other things like sending X-ray information, or you pick it, could take more data, but again, it's only done occasionally. And so hopefully the costs of the network side don't hold down the initial expansion of telemedicine, but over time it's going to have to be dealt with. And whether it's dealt with the FCC, as I mentioned, the FCC providing some subsidy for poor neighborhoods, whether it becomes a required part of a medical plan because it saves money, therefore let's support this approach as opposed to a different approach. That's all going to take time to work through, but I suspect it's going to. Again, the first thing we have to do is show the value, increase the scale of the usage, and then that attention will get help get the economics worked through. Asking the cell companies to subsidize, that's only going to go so far, so we're going to have to find other ways of doing it.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I'm right here. First table. Too close. I'm very curious. Why did some people think that you were violating the laws of physics?
Well, there used to be this multiple of the first generation. How many voice subscribers, how many voice calls can you handle on a given amount of radio spectrum on a given antenna? And so one used multiple of the analog of the first generation. And so TDMA, which was the one that went in the US before we came out with CDMA, and over in Europe, they used to get at best about 3 times the capacity, which was just not enough to support significant growth. And my initial statement was that one perhaps could get 40 times with CDMA, that that you could get perhaps 10 to 20 with some of the initial fieldings. Those claims were met with significant doubt, and to say the least. And everybody had a different argument. And the problem is you can find, okay, this degradation causes so much loss, this degradation, and say a CDMA communication causes so much loss, this other degradation, and then people made the mistake of adding those up and saying, okay, now we have this degradation, and clearly you've lost your capacity advantage. And what they missed is it's all statistical. You have a certain probability of this, certain probability of that, certain probability of this. The whole thing is an issue of averages, and so you have to treat that very carefully. And couldn't quite get that understanding across, and so that's why people kept coming back and saying we're violating the laws of physics. By the way, the latest results we have is about 50x of analog, so it's done well.
So I have one question. When we have the setup here is that when there is a Wireless Health Hall of Fame sometime in the future, you will be a founding member of it, not because you're a healthcare person, but because through your courage and creativity, you created the foundation for wireless health globally. So we have a room full of engineers, and you at a time were a very successful academic researcher. And you had the courage to leave that, to go into business, and then to violate the laws of physics, prove New York wrong, prove Stanford wrong, go Bears, and
Sound like one of my sons.
build this company, and then, of course, give yourself the flexibility to give back in the ways you're doing. So do you, kind of as a final question, do you have any words of wisdom as a mentor to the
Well, on
engineers
one
in this
side,
field?
teaching academic work is fascinating. Being able to do research in an academic environment is wonderful, or some research laboratory environments. I myself believe that's where the federal government, which has put some in, is just not putting enough money into our research universities, institutions, and the payoff there is huge. So clearly that's something that definitely needs some further increases, being able to provide support. But business is also interesting. I claim that perhaps one of the most fascinating things is being able to go from some idea that you've had and take it and end up with a product that's very, very useful to people, and seeing that happen. So yes, there's a monetary payoff, but really the greater excitement, I think, is just that accomplishment. Something you had some doubts about, you had an idea, is it really going to move forward? So that's very invigorating. And of course, you can do both in a sense. You can stay at the institution and have that idea transition to a company, and then grow that way. So there's a whole way, different ways of playing this. One of the rationalizations I used myself when I decided to go, after 13 years of academia, into business, not only that the business turned out to be fun, but that for years I've been talking about the value of theoretical studies, that, you know, dig deep, understand a lot of the theory, and yes, it will have some usefulness. And there's always doubters of that. So it's always good to be able to take that theory, put it into practice, and show there's a great value to it. So if you do decide to go out into business, or you decide to stay in an institution and take on a project that's high risk, you have to keep thinking, do dynamic programming, think about it 4 a.m. or whatever, and say, yes, am I on a good track? Should I continue? But don't be afraid of trying to take advantage of an idea. And we are going through a world of such rapid change that it opens up huge amounts of opportunities. And so I also often say, be opportunistic, watch what's happening, and occasionally you can leap on something and take advantage of that opportunity. So just lots of possibilities out there. It's an exciting time.
Well, you're an inspiration, and everyone, please thank you.